Hunted and bleeding in the frozen wilderness, her only hope was a solitary cabin, home to a man who had secretly built an empire far from the world he now hid from. Alara collapsed against the gnarled trunk of an ancient fir, breath tearing in her lungs. Hours, it felt like days, since she'd broken free from the sterile, cold confines of the facility. The extraction had been brutal, clinical, and the chase relentless. They wanted the data she carried, data that could shatter the global influence of Chronos Industries, the monolithic tech corporation that had held her captive. She clutched the encrypted drive hidden beneath her blood-soaked jacket. Her left arm hung uselessly, a ragged tear in her parka revealing a deep, bleeding gash likely from a stray shot or a fall during her chaotic escape through the jagged, frozen peaks of the Cascade Mountains. Every step was agony, every breath a struggle against the frigid air and overwhelming exhaustion. She knew they wouldn't stop. Chronos protected its secrets and assets with ruthless efficiency. As darkness deepened, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of bruised violet and inky black, hope dwindled. She needed shelter, warmth, anything to stem the tide of cold and blood that threatened to claim her. Staggering onward through the deepening snow, her vision blurred. She saw it, a faint golden square of light in the distance, a beacon of impossible warmth against the vast, indifferent wilderness. With a final surge of adrenaline born of pure desperation, she stumbled towards the light, praying it wasn't another mirage of her failing mind. The light grew steadier, resolving into the window of a small, solitary cabin nestled amongst the trees. Before she could reach the door, her legs gave out, and she crumpled into the snow, the last vestiges of her strength draining away into the cold earth. When Alara next opened her eyes, she was lying on a surprisingly soft cot, a rough-spun blanket pulled up to her chin. The air was warm, smelling faintly of wood smoke and something herbal. A silent, imposing figure moved near the hearth, tending to a crackling fire. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face etched with lines that spoke of solitude and hard work. His eyes, when they met hers, were a piercing gray, assessing, wary, and unsettlingly calm. He didn't speak immediately, simply offering her a mug of hot, fragrant tea. Alara flinched when he approached, her body tensing, ready to fight or flee despite her injuries. Years of living on the run, of being hunted by powerful entities, had instilled in her a deep-seated distrust of everyone. "Who are you?" she rasped, her voice hoarse and weak. He didn't answer, instead gesturing towards her bandaged arm with a silent question in his eyes. He had cleaned and meticulously dressed her wound, a surprisingly skilled job for someone living in such isolation. She felt a grudging flicker of relief, but the suspicion remained, a cold knot in her stomach. Why would anyone help her? What did he want? He moved with a quiet efficiency, his movements economical and deliberate. There was an aura of stillness about him, a contained power that made him seem both formidable and utterly detached from the chaos she carried. He seemed to demand nothing, offer nothing beyond basic sustenance and shelter. It was unnerving. Alara watched him, her mind racing, trying to decipher his motives, his history. He didn't seem like a typical recluse. There was a precision to his actions, a quiet competence that hinted at a past far more complex than simple hermitage. Days bled into a week within the confines of the cabin. Alara's physical wounds began to heal, slowly knitting back together under the silent care of her rescuer. He introduced himself simply as Silas. He spoke little, but his presence was a constant quiet reassurance. He brought her nourishing broth, changed her dressings with gentle hands, and simply existed in the cabin, going about his routines, chopping wood, tending a small hidden garden under a canvas lean-to, repairing tools. As the initial shock and pain subsided, Alara began to observe him more closely. There was a profound weariness in his eyes sometimes, a deep sadness that seemed to echo her own. He never asked about her past, never pressed for details of the horrors she had fled. This lack of interrogation, so different from the relentless questioning she had endured at the facility, was disarming. Slowly, tentatively, Alara began to lower her guard. She started speaking in hesitant whispers at first, talking about the beauty of the mountain peaks visible from the cabin window, the taste of the fresh water he brought from a nearby spring, anything but the nightmares that still haunted her sleep. Silas would listen, sometimes offering a quiet observation or a simple nod. He shared small things about his own life here, his satisfaction in the quiet rhythm of the days, his appreciation for the profound silence of the wilderness. He spoke of seeking peace, of finding a place where the noise of the outside world couldn't reach. This shared desire for solitude, for an escape from something burdensome, began to forge a fragile connection between them. It was built not on shared histories, but on a mutual understanding of the need for refuge and the quiet strength required to seek it. Despite his outward tranquility and stated desire for peace, there were subtle hints about Silas's past that intrigued and unsettled Alara. The cabin, while rustic, contained items that seemed out of place for a simple recluse. There was a sophisticated, albeit disconnected communication array hidden in a reinforced shed behind the cabin. His tools were high quality, some clearly modified for specific non-wilderness tasks. He possessed a surprisingly deep knowledge of obscure geological formations and resource extraction techniques, information that seemed oddly specific for someone living off the grid. One evening, while he was working on repairing a complex piece of equipment that looked suspiciously like a high-frequency scanner, Alara asked him directly, "You're not just a hermit, are you, Silas?" He paused, his hands still, and his gray eyes met hers with a familiar wariness. He didn't deny it, but the silence stretched, heavy with unspoken history. He finally spoke, his voice low. "I built things, Alara. Big things, things that changed the landscape literally." He spoke of vast projects, of moving mountains and diverting rivers, of extracting resources on an unprecedented scale. He spoke of empires built on iron, ore, and raw data. But his words were laced with a profound regret, a weariness that went deeper than simple exhaustion. He hinted at the ruthlessness required. The ethical lines blurred and eventually crossed in the pursuit of power and profit. He didn't elaborate on the specifics, but the sheer scale of what he alluded to was staggering. Alara listened, a growing unease settling in her stomach. The man who had saved her, the quiet, seemingly gentle figure, had a past shrouded in power and perhaps exploitation. The peace he sought here felt less like a choice and more like a penance. The truth about Silas's past didn't come from his words alone, but from piecing together the fragments he let slip and the evidence hidden in plain sight. One rainy afternoon, exploring the small dusty library in the cabin, Alara found a collection of old, bound journals. They weren't diaries in the traditional sense, but rather logs, technical specifications, and business plans. They detailed the rise of Terragenesis Dynamics, a company that had dominated global resource acquisition and land modification for nearly 2 decades. The entries, written in Silas's hand, chronicled the aggressive acquisition of vast tracts of land, often through questionable means, and the development of technologies that allowed for the extraction of resources with unprecedented efficiency, often at significant environmental cost. He wrote about complex financial structures, hostile takeovers, and negotiations with governments that bordered on coercion. The name Silas Vane appeared frequently, listed as the founder, CEO, and driving force behind the empire. Alara felt a cold shock. The man who had rescued her from one predatory organization was the architect of another, albeit one that operated in a different sphere. His desire for peace, for solitude in the wilderness, now seemed less like a simple yearning for quiet, and more like a retreat from the consequences of his actions. The journals detailed projects that had displaced communities, scarred landscapes, and accumulated unimaginable wealth. Her feelings for him, the fragile trust she had begun to build, were suddenly thrown into disarray, replaced by a confusing mix of gratitude for his help and revulsion for the empire he had built. The revelation of Silas's true identity and the nature of his past empire created a profound internal conflict within Alara. She owed him her life. He had pulled her from the brink of death and offered her refuge without question. He was kind, quiet, and had shown her a gentle care she hadn't experienced in years. Yet, the knowledge of the wealth he had amassed, the power he had wielded, and the potential harm his company had caused gnawed at her. Her own fight was against the unchecked power of corporations, their disregard for human cost in the pursuit of profit, and here she was, finding refuge with a man who had been a king in that very world. Could the man who saved her life be reconciled with the man who had built an empire on exploitation? Was his current solitude a genuine attempt at atonement, or simply a comfortable hiding place from a world he had bent to his will? She watched him as he moved through the cabin, seeing him now through a different lens. The quiet strength she had admired now seemed like the controlled power of a man used to making decisions that impacted thousands. His self-sufficiency felt less like admirable resilience, and more like the isolation of someone who had stood above others for too long. She struggled to reconcile the two images, the compassionate rescuer and the ruthless titan of industry. The cabin, once a haven, now felt like a cage, trapping her with a man whose past was as complex and potentially dangerous as the future she was fleeing. The fragile trust was battered, replaced by a cautious uncertainty and a deep, unsettling question: who was Silas Vane really? The peace they had found, fragile as it was, shattered one frigid afternoon. The silence of the mountain was broken by the distant yet rapidly approaching thrum of rotors. Alara's blood ran cold. Kronos had found her. Silas, his face instantly hardening, moved with a speed and purpose that belied his usual calm. He didn't ask questions. His eyes, sharp and focused, met hers with an understanding that transcended words. He knew. He led her to a hidden basement beneath the cabin. A surprisingly modern reinforced bunker stocked with supplies and equipment Alara hadn't known existed. As they descended, the sounds of the approaching helicopters grew louder, accompanied now by the whine of snowmobiles cutting through the drifts. The corporate enforcers were here. A retrieval team sent by Kronos, undoubtedly with orders to recover the data Alara carried and silence her permanently. From a small reinforced viewport, they watched as two sleek black helicopters landed in a cleared area near the cabin. Armed figures in tactical gear swarmed out, spreading out with military precision. They were professionals, equipped with advanced tracking technology and clearly ready for a fight. Alara felt a surge of fear, but also a grim determination. She wouldn't be taken again. Looking at Silas, she saw not the retired mogul, but a man whose eyes held the same fierce resolve she felt. He was preparing to defend his home and by extension her. The attack was swift and brutal. The corporate enforcers, expecting a simple retrieval from a lone hermit, were met with unexpected resistance. Silas, moving with surprising agility and tactical knowledge, had several surprises prepared. The cabin itself was rigged with defensive measures Alara hadn't noticed. Reinforced shutters, strategically placed firing points, and a hidden cache of weaponry. The enforcers advanced towards the cabin, their movements confident, but Silas was ready. He used the terrain to his advantage, guiding Alara in a desperate defense. She, despite her still healing arm, found herself functioning on pure adrenaline and the survival instincts honed by years on the run. She wasn't a fighter by training, but she could follow instructions, cover Silas, and make every movement count. They fought side by side, a strange, unlikely alliance forged in the heat of battle. Silas's knowledge of combat and strategy was formidable, hinting at a past even more complex than the business empire. He moved with a cold, calculated efficiency, taking down attackers with precise shots and tactical maneuvers. Alara, armed with a rifle Silas had given her, found a grim satisfaction in pushing back against the organization that had hunted her for so long. The quiet cabin transformed into a war zone, the crackle of the fire replaced by the staccato of gunfire and the shouts of the attackers. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but their desperation and knowledge of the territory gave them an edge. The fight was a blur of movement, adrenaline, and the shared focus on survival. As the last of the Kronos enforcers retreated, carrying their wounded and defeated, an eerie silence descended on the snow-covered landscape. The cabin was scarred, windows shattered, walls bearing the marks of gunfire, but it stood. Alara and Silas stood amidst the wreckage, covered in soot and sweat, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. They looked at each other, and in that moment the past that had separated them seemed to fade into insignificance. They had faced death together and emerged battered but alive. The shared experience of fighting for their lives, of relying on each other implicitly in the face of overwhelming threat, had forged a bond deeper than words. Silas reached out, gently touching Alara's face, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and something soft and vulnerable she hadn't seen before. "You fought like a lion," he murmured, his voice rough. Alara leaned into his touch, tears finally tracking paths through the grime on her cheeks. "We survived," she whispered. The revelation of his past still lingered, a complex shadow. But in that moment, standing amidst the remnants of the attack, his actions spoke louder than any past misdeeds. He had not only protected her, but had put his own peaceful existence, his very life, on the line for her. In the quiet aftermath they spoke not of empires or data, but of the simple, profound fact that they had faced the storm together and found strength in each other. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, a shared understanding that transcended their complicated histories and laid the foundation for something new, something real. The attack by Kronos, while devastating, also served as a catalyst. It was clear they couldn't stay in the cabin, their location was compromised. But it also solidified their bond and their resolve. Silas, using resources Alara hadn't known he still possessed, hidden accounts, encrypted contacts, a network built during his years at the helm of Terragenesis Dynamics, began to plan their next steps. He didn't want to return to the world of corporate power, but he wouldn't simply abandon Alara or the fight against organizations like Kronos. Alara, in turn, saw a path forward that combined her knowledge of Kronos' inner workings with Silas's vast resources and understanding of how powerful systems operated. They wouldn't just disappear. They would use their combined experiences and Silas's considerable, albeit ethically complicated, wealth to build something new. They found a remote, secure location, not as isolated as the cabin, but equipped with the technology and infrastructure they needed. They began to build a new life, focused not on accumulating wealth or power, but on using their unique skills and resources to help others who were being exploited by powerful entities. Alara worked on exposing corporate malfeasance, using the data she had saved and her understanding of Kronos' operations. Silas, applying his strategic mind and logistical expertise, built a network of support for whistleblowers and those targeted by powerful organizations. Their pasts remained a part of them, a reminder of the darkness they had navigated, but they chose to use that knowledge to illuminate the path for others. They found healing not in forgetting, but in repurposing their experiences, forging a future together built on resilience, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. If you enjoyed this story of survival, secrets, and second chances, make sure to subscribe for more tales from the edge of the world.